And a very warm welcome. You're joining us this week at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. Just as President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, in his capacity as Minister of Finance, delivered his maiden budget on the 17th of February in Parliament, laying out the government's plans ahead as Sri Lanka seeks to revive from an economic crisis as well as set the stage for lasting development. So President Anura Kumara Dissanayake stated that his budget lays out the initial steps towards building a strong and stable economy as Sri Lanka is set to repay loans after debt restructuring in exactly 3 years. We've invited to our studios 3 gentlemen who will be able to discuss and review this year's budget. Of course, the first budget of the JVP-led NPP government. I've invited to our studios to discuss mostly on state-owned enterprises as well as the business environment and how the tax situation really affects not just corporates but individuals as well. Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, who is the managing partner at BDO Sri Lanka and former chairman of People's Bank. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you for having me here.
We also have with us Dr. Kenneth De Silva, global business cycle economist, who will talk to us about trends internationally and how that affects Sri Lanka's situation, as well as how the government's budget plan really supports Sri Lanka's situation going forward. And to discuss the corporate situation, SMEs, how the business environment is in Sri Lanka, I've invited to our studios Dr. Ravi Liyanage, Chairman and the Chief Executive Officer of Raigam Group of Companies here in Sri Lanka. A very warm welcome to you as well. I'd like to ask all of you, let's start with Mr. Rajapakse, maybe your view on the budget presented by the President, whether it really, as the government says, sets out to revive this ailing economy.
To begin with this Indeewari, we need to understand about this budget is a unique budget. Why do I say that? If you take last 78 years, I believe that they didn't have this kind of restrictions because we are in a probationary period. So when a boy is naughty, so someone will have to make sure that he is going to be good. So therefore you need to have cane in your hand. So that's what IMF has given us 3 years period. Look here, show us how are you going to be well disciplined. So that is, I think, very important. In that sense, I believe even the President or the Minister of Finance would have had a time to make sure that you present this budget in such a way to one way fall in line with IMF expectations, the other way they have just come to the power and there's a manifesto and they have promised a lot of things for the people. So how are they going to balance? And especially, I should say that there are 2 or 3 important parameters that they were supposed to have when you present the budget. One is about you need to increase government revenue. There is no way that you can compromise that. The number 2 is that you need to make sure that you control government expenditure. Especially, there's a large amount of government officers, there's government servants. How are you going to control their the expenses, and also make sure that you limit your borrowings. You can't simply borrow now. So these are the 3 parameters basically within which I believe that the finance minister has presented the budget. Having said that, Indeewari, you also need to understand that there is a very, very powerful act which is in force now. It is the Economic Transformation Act. So in that act, I think, I don't know whether this kind of thing is there in any part of the world, but in Sri Lanka, during Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's period, they brought 3 or 4 important parliament acts, passed by the parliament. One of those is economic transformation. According to Economic Transformation Act, you are supposed to have 5% growth, GDP growth. So it's something, you need to, whether you like it or not, you have to achieve. And you need to create employment. You can have, you need to have at least your unemployment rate should be 5%. So while you are increasing employment, whether it could be state sector or it could be private sector. So likewise, you need to make sure that you have your foreign reserves up to certain amount of billions. Likewise, there are so many parameters. So those are very, very important. So therefore, we are now probably a honeymoon period. I'm sure within these 3 years, everyone will have to look at and see how are we going to get out. And in the meantime, he presented this budget when the country just got out from the bankruptcy situation. So that is also important. That's my first
Right, I think we'll have much to talk about based on your
yes.
review. I'd like to turn to Dr. Kenneth De Silva. How do you analyze the budget, especially from a perspective of repaying debts, balancing economic recovery, and really taking the country forward towards revival?
Well, in the very, picking up from what Sujeewa just mentioned, there are quite a bit of key variables that he mentioned. One was the IMF, then he talked about growth, then he talked about the economic act which has been passed, then he talked about reserves, unemployment. Now all these things stack up only in 2 quadrants. How do we achieve growth? Growth, in my sense, is your GDP growth is, Sujeewa knows this well, GDP growth is nothing but your top line in your income statement. That is your revenue. Your revenue comprises of your foreign earnings plus your domestic expansion. In other words, in business cycles, we call it market share. As a country, if you take a national balance sheet and a national income statement, how do you achieve market share is the primary focus. Now here there is a contradiction in how you achieve this. The IMF restricts you categorically in the Annexure 2 of 2023 December, which they issued. I suggest that you look at it carefully when you all are doing these types of programs. That framework is the structure by which you have to go by. There is no deviation in that. No sooner you deviate from that, you are in trouble. And Sujeewa rightly said, it's a tough situation, but you can't get 5% growth. In the IMF categorically says that till 2028, your GDP growth has to be 3%. Your nominal growth is 8%. That is, inflation targeting is 5. Your GDP is 3. So your nominal growth has to be 8. And it's projected for 2028. That is hard-coded. You can't deviate. So that is your first thing. So government saying 5% GDP, there itself there is a contradiction now in how you're going to achieve that. Are we going to break away from the stringent criteria? Because if you're talking market share entails for you to generate a profit story. How do you become competitive to get this profit story and earn market share in the global markets? Plus, to have a competitive product range like Dr. Ravili and Aga's industry, how do you compete amongst other imports that are coming into this country which are equally or in better standard than in Sri Lanka? Now for the local entrepreneur, that's a huge challenge, right? Because to become competitive, there are key variables in your inputs. Those inputs in the cost of production are tied to monetary and fiscal policy. That's why I said, coming to Sujeeva's point, you can't achieve 5% growth if you don't have monetary and fiscal sovereignty. What you mean by that is, if Ravi wants to put up a factory, he must have the ability to look at his projected cash flows of that factory, look at the product that he's going to sell either globally or locally, and see what is the profitability and how fast he can recover that profitability. Now the profitability of that particular project from a project finance point of view will primarily determine on the payback period. That payback period will be determined on the cost plus the tax incentives that are given, including the accelerated depreciation to recover that cost and have internalized savings for Ravi. If Ravi's savings increase, our national savings increase. In traditional economics, we take national savings as government savings and public savings. So corporate savings are not included in that, it's masked. No one looks at corporate profitability.
Right.
Corporate profitability, because traditional economics has focused on the individual. Utility maximization of the individual, not as a industry, not as a company balance sheet. But the biggest contributor to the GDP is individuals or corporates. It's corporates. Who are the biggest job creators? Corporates. So if you are serious about a path of 5% growth, then the key variables have to stack up. For me, these are disaligned. And with that, I mean, there is a contradiction as to how we are going to move. Because as I come back into the IMF table, nothing has changed. Sujeewa spoke about reserves and debt. Our external debt, foreign debt as a percentage of total debt, of total debt, is increasing, not decreasing, even after the restructure, remember. So we went through all this process of pain to achieve debt sustainability, not to increase our external debt. So there is a huge double-edged sword in that, right?
Right.
So any external debt is increasing, your current account balance is increasing, it has not improved, which is your trade account plus your services plus your net services. There is a huge deficit in that. That is projected to remain constant. So that's your trade. Then your fiscal deficit increasing. It's not reducing. From 5.3, it goes down to 4.4 till 2028.
So what you're basically saying is there are warning signs here, and the
there are
government
huge
should look
contradictions in this whole thing, and that's why I'm worried about this IMF austerity framework that we have embraced so wholeheartedly.
Right.
I think people have not understood the magnitude and the nuances of these wordings that have been incorporated into all the policy documents. I think I told this on your program earlier, these words have to be actioned. Words mean certain things. When you don't understand each word and when you agree to those words, because everything is sugar-coated, right? In the interest of various parties, the language that you use is fantastic. I mean, I can read some of it to you,
right,
and you will not even be able to decipher because it's so well written. But the intention is completely different. You have to be very careful in this particular document. I would suggest for you to have a look at the IMF Annexure 2 in the IMF document, because that's the governing doctrine that we have to go by for the next 3 years, because the government has said they are going to follow the IMF program in some shape or form. Sujeewa rightly said there is no escape from that, which is the real fact. So taxes are not going to reduce because you can't reduce, because there is a primary surplus that you have to create. You have to have a 15%. 15% of GDP has to be in terms of revenue, right? They have provision for a slightly higher fiscal deficit this year, but overall, we are back to square one from where we started, and mind you, we have to go back to the capital markets and borrow.
Right. Dr. Ravi Leonage, I think you might have something to add here, especially from an entrepreneur's
Of course,
point of view.
Kenneth and Sujeewa, both of them, Kenneth came with the economic purview of this budget and as to how he looks at the budget, and Sujeewa as a prominent chartered accountant and in Sri Lanka and former, I have to tell the fact that you have not mentioned this, for one of the presidents of Sri Lanka Institute of Chartered Accountants once, and they really have the better analysis in the economic perspective of the budget than me. I am a business leader, in partly an academic, but anyway, mainly business leader. From the business leader's point of view, Indeewari, I have to tell you, no, we can talk hours and hours about the budget and the credentials and the proposals and all that have been mentioned in the budget, but that had been, because we have been hearing that since we came to know what the budget is in Sri Lanka. No, I was born in 1963. Now I am 61 years old, 61 plus, right? From year 20 of my age, we have been listening to budget speeches, right? Every budget speech, you get lots and lots of proposals, except Dr. Anam Perras and certain period of Ronnie DeMel, but we have not seen the budgets have been come to a real implementation. The budget is something which I called as, Kenneth, you won't agree with me, it's a concept document, right?
Correct.
So you forecast the next year, right? 2025 as to how the government expenditure, and as to how you maintain to meet the expenditure, you have to have the income. No, if there's a deficit, how you go to bridge. Now, last year it was I think 2,104 billion, the budget deficit. This year is 2,200. right? With all this, no, IMF also came into scene, and 3 years they have given us a grace period for us to perform. Whether if you don't perform, then we don't know what will happen. Then there are certain things which we know for sure that we can't, as Kenneth very correctly mentioned, people were expecting the tax reduction and a lot of reliefs and vehicle imports, less duties and all that sort of things. That really had been confined to the stages, the political stages and all. But in my point here is, all the budgets, we talk more and more about the numbers and the longer document you are describing through rural economy, this economy, that economy, various things, right? This budget also comprises all these. But we have to appeal the government. The number one is to please implement them. The plan, this is a plan, right? In management, there's a simple context. No, there are 4 segments of management if you describe them. Then the first one is planning process. The second one is the organizing resources. And third one is implementation. And the fourth is control. This called as is policy, right? POLC, right? Then you have to, no, this is only plan. No, you have to see, no, that is properly organized, whatever you have planned, you have to organize resource, the human resource, monetary resource, various things, right? And then to come to implementation phase, and to implement, and then control. Not only to implement, then control whether they are being properly in place, right. And what is being suggested being implemented properly, right? They are going on the schedules and all that, in the numbers, dates, everything is coming through. Then my appeal to the government, whoever who are the ruler, I don't mind whether that is NPP or JVP or UNP or whatever. No, we are not colorblind, right? We are colorblind, of course. We are not colorblind. We are colorblind. We don't mind who runs the government, but this is their job. Then our job is to make the money and to contribute the GDP, yeah. But maintain the consistency. The consistency is very important. Now this time, this budget you increase VAT by about another, no, this budget has not touched, but for example, and the next year you will get a tax relief for someone, yeah. Next year you cancel. Yes, yeah. But when you implement, when you start planning and you investment and all that sort of things, the next year you find the particular, the area, yeah. The tax relief is removed, it was abolished. Right? Then what will happen to the investors? The investors confidence. We are talking about FDIs, foreign direct investment and encouragement and all that sort of things. But to maintain that, you have to maintain. To ensure that you have to maintain the consistency. That is the simple and very basic appeal and humble appeal from the rulers that I have to make, as to represent the entire business community, entire entrepreneur community, entire enterprises in Sri Lanka. Please maintain the consistency. Whatever you propose, please implement and maintain, and consistency, at least about 3-4 years, you maintain it.
3-4 years is not enough, no?
No, maybe at least to this crisis until we come out there.
I mean, I'm just picking up from Dr. Ravi. I just want to add to that. I mean, he's absolutely right in terms of profitability and consistency, because I'm again looking at from a capital expansion point, which contributes to your capital formation of the country, which is around 30% currently. Bulk of that 30% of the capital formation comes from domestic capital formation, which is the local entrepreneurs. Then 1.5% comes from FDI. The balance is government spending.
I think Mr. Rajapakse will have something to add, but I also want to ask you, Mr. Lianage, as an entrepreneur, has highlighted the humble appeal or plea to the government, saying maintain policy consistency. We've been speaking about this, I think, every year during budget discussions. We speak to you about how this policy consistency has just become a buzzword. But do you think this budget or the government's policies really sets the tone for consistent policies in order to secure not just the private sector interests in the country and employment, to make sure that the economy operates, but also to keep the foreign investors interested and confident in the economy?
Yeah, Indeewari, I think that's important point stemming from what Ravi said about policy consistency and things like that. I believe, especially about the taxes. Now, We have a very bad history in this country where the tax today 30%, tomorrow completely gone. Today exemptions are given for 20 years straight away, but tomorrow you can see no exemptions. I mean, imagine how can the institutional investor, foreign investor come and then they establish their business here, because when there are no political consistency. But if you look at again, according to the Economic Transformation Act, you are supposed to have $5 billion investment every year. $5 billion, mind you. It's not a small target. It's a huge target looking at from the current environment. But of course, going forward, it may be very easy. But if you take any other country, they easily achieve about, within the Asian countries, $16 billion without any difficulty. So therefore, of course, we all three are, I believe that, strongly believe that we need to have a policy consistency. Having said that, Indeewari, I can see now if you look at tax proposals, what has been proposed by the minister, I think there are very few, which we as professionals, probably as entrepreneurs, I think we must be happy about that. Looking at from now, yesterday, or rather today morning, I went for an event. The Minister Sunil Handunesi was there, he was the chief guest. He said in Sri Lanka, 90% income, export income derived from 469 businesses, Ravi. 90% of the foreign income, right? Export income comes from 469. Yesterday, I remember when the Honorable Anura Kumar Dissanayake was the chief guest at another event, he said about, let me say, 64% of our revenue, that is tax revenue, come from 600 odd files. Can you ever believe 64% of the revenue, I believe that the figures are right, comes from 600 files. I mean, this is unbelievable. There is a huge disparity about, because people who pay taxes keep on paying taxes. That is where we have been lobbying, we have been canvassing, we have been telling, look here, make sure that you widen your, the tax net.
Remind us, who evades taxes? How should they really be targeted here?
That is a culture in this country. It's very unfortunate, I must tell you, because I pay taxes, because I can tell I pay taxes up to the maximum. There is no question that we can't avoid, or rather evade, not avoid, evade taxes. But there are people, they don't mind, they don't care, they don't feel about that. That is the issue. I mean, there are friends of ours, they have multi-billions. Do you think that they pay taxes? No. That is the culture which has to be changed, which is very important. So then everybody will feel. Now, of course, everybody says, why should we pay taxes? Because they all, take money out from the system. Why should we pay tax? That's basically a spontaneous answer for anybody. It should not be the case. I'm sure that, while we are working on towards better tomorrow, I'm sure, people will feel that everyone. But for that, government will have to. That's what now this government, even previous governments, we were really working very hard to make sure that digital programs are going to be in a place. But now this government also, they are talking about, they have appointed one of the prominent personalities for the, the worthy cause. But again, one of the things that I like from these proposals, that if you are a VAT payer, if you are liable for VAT, if you are an entrepreneur who is liable for VAT, then you can't have cash transactions. You need to make sure that you always have POS machines. When you say POS machines, I can't simply come to you being an entrepreneur, the trader. I can't say, look here, you take this money. You are not supposed to accept that money because you are a VAT registered person. Then you have to ask my credit card or debit card through which I have to execute the transaction, and you have to accept that. That goes through the banking system.
Right.
That goes to the banking system. Likewise, I hope it will happen because it takes longer time. I mean, a year or two, I don't think that you can do, because it's a huge, because you have to collect all the data and many more things. But working towards that is a positive sign, I must tell you.
Dr. Ravi Liagne, I wanted to ask you earlier about the investment climate, the doing business situation here in Sri Lanka. I think I'm told we don't have much time before we go for a short break. But how would you comment on the business environment for doing business?
No, of course, as Sujeewa very correctly mentioned, now we had bad experience during the recent past, not changing of the tax system and which really disturbed the business environment, and the business potentials and the integrity of business people as to how they go forward with their business. And most of the business people, as we very correctly know, other than those who evade taxes, they have really trimmed down their businesses due to the fact that they can't cope up with these inconsistent procedures and policies. Now we have to maintain some or other. Now we can it's 5 billion FDI. It's a big huge challenge. But when you compare with Thailand, the countries like Thailand, their FDI is going about 85 billion, 90 billion. That's so huge money. There are plenty of investors who are willing to come to Sri Lanka. But only thing, they have to make the climate.
And political stability.
Political stability and the climate. Political stability is now here with this government. There's 159 members in the parliament. It's very much exceeding two-thirds of the majority, two-third majority. Then there's no instability in the government. We can run for next 5 years. The stabilization is guaranteed. But only thing they have to, with that stability, they have to make sure that this stability will be made use to inculcate and to conducing environment to the business, those who invest in Sri Lanka, and also from Sri Lankan entrepreneurial category, and of course the foreign investors. Then if we are given that opportunity, I am pretty sure that country can break these hurdles.
Right.
Now this year, okay.
Yeah, before you go for break, can I take a minute?
Yes, of course.
Because now it is said that 40% of the national income, mind you, derived from Western province.
Correct.
Imagine 40%, 44% of the national income only from one province.
Yeah.
How about all the other 20 odd provinces?
Yeah, that is high scale.
This has a huge disparity.
I was going to pick that point up when you talk about taxation. The central focus is on the Western province. That's where the wealth generation, 40% of your GDP is coming from the Western province. Right. So that's a huge problem. So you have to have dispersion. So it's about dispersing growth to the rest of the provinces. So it's such a big challenge because you have to create infrastructure. That again erodes on the national balance sheet. Who is going to put that infrastructure? What is the payback period? All those things. And that when you undertake such infrastructure projects, when you have to integrate the economy, after the war, after 30 years of war, for the first time, I think we saw rapid development coming around, and in some form of integration took place after the war. That was much needed. There are questions on how it was done, but overall I think we see the positiveness because it's connecting people from different provinces and brings goods and service to an access point, right, which you can use, because then it becomes part of the system. So you have to continue to do that. Now the restriction with this IMF program curtails that, but the government has made a valiant attempt to rethink of public expenditure, and they have, I think, allocated 1.3 trillion from the budget this time for public expenditure, which is, right, I think, an all-time high, which is also needed because it's inflation adjusted, because everything else has gone up after the currency depreciation. So that's a good point. And coming back to the taxation, first thing is you can't have taxation for 5 years. Because any project for a capital investment, Ravi will tell you, the payback is just bordering the 5th year, because it takes at least 2.5 years to construct a plant. Right. Once the cash flow starts coming for the payback, if your tax policy changes and the accelerated depreciation policy changes, plus your corporate income tax table changes, Ravi's investment is in jeopardy. So is the national investment in jeopardy.
Right. I'm once again told that I have a minute. Dr. Lianake mentioned about political stability, that it is ensured with the majority. But we've seen in our past too that what people thought, what we thought was unshakable, was brought to the ground. So what, very quickly, do you think, before we move in to discuss more important things as well, government should do to make sure that this majority, this power, this stability is ensured through right policy and ensuring short, mid and long-term development for the country?
Ravi also mentioned that about the implementation. We all agree, let us say, agree for these budget proposals. But then there must be a follow-up action to be taken on a, let us say, quarterly basis to make sure that, these are being implemented. You have a system, but I propose that without getting bureaucrats, at least you must have a separate independent implementation arms, independent. And they will not have any conflict of interest with anybody, any institution. They can call, they can ask them, they can summon them, they can ask, look here, what's going to happen? So I think that is very important. I believe that the government will have to really do it. If not, again, end of the year, of course, we don't have 1 year because it's only 8 months, because now already 2-3 months gone. By the time it's passed in the parliament, another months gone, then they will have, the representative government will have about 8 months. So can they implement all these things within these 8 months is a $1 billion question. So for that, I think you must have a stringent control to make sure that, okay, you implement all this.
Well, we'll take a short break. We have a chartered accountant, an economist, and an entrepreneur here discussing Sri Lanka's business situation. We'll be right back after the short break. Welcome back. You're joining us at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24, and we're discussing Sri Lanka's budget and Sri Lanka's revival path to progress. Dr. Kenneth De Silva, I think we'd like to talk about SOE reforms, the previous government stance, and then the interim period where President Ranil Wickremesinghe, then government, looked at SOE reforms, and now this government took a turn to take steps to veer away from that stance. However, there is a bit of spending now through the budget for SriLankan Airlines.
Right.
How do you see the state-owned enterprise situation and how it can be transformed into profit-making entities?
Right. Very important question. I think it's a subject of wide public debate as well, because lots have been said even in the IMF to reform three or four particular institutions. But if you take the total SOE portfolio in Indeewari, there are about 417 institutions per se. Now, out of that, I think majority, 90% I would think, are not really functional. Right? There are so many agencies, so many layers within layers. I think that level of fat we have to get rid of. I mean, that's my personal take. How you do that, it's a sensitive thing because there is about 1.2 million public servants in that quadrant. You have to have an alternative mechanism to ensure that their livelihoods are sustained. Now, it's easy for us to say, do away with SOE, which people don't talk about the livelihoods of these public servants. So, like what Singapore did when they trimmed their excess, they always looked at what are the alternatives that we can give the population or the business community to resettle. So, they didn't do ad hoc. Now, we are pushing ad hoc reforms. Why I say ad hoc is we are just saying, okay, do away with SOEs. So, my point is you have to reform the SOEs. You have to keep SOEs which are very important for external competitiveness. For Ravi's sake and for the SME and the industries in Sri Lanka, that is paramount of importance to me, and I think the government also knows it. The key three state institutions or the state public corporations are Ceylon Electricity Board, Ceylon Petroleum, controversial SriLankan Airlines, and also Water Board. Right? Now, if you look at their balance sheets, you will find something really amazing. Sujeewa probably will know because he is an auditor and a chartered accountant. In each of these balance sheets, the four that I mentioned, they have foreign borrowings, all on the balance sheet. So the external borrowings are very volatile in terms of their debt servicing, because as soon as the exchange rate moves, they are handicapped because it's not their decision. The exchange rate moves as a policy implication, and the losses accrue on that income statement, and it's capitalized in the balance sheet. And then when someone looks at the balance sheet, they think, okay, negative net worth, get rid of this, so we are pumping too much of money. But the causation of that impact is coming from the exchange rate movement. So if you look at the recent numbers, classic example, no one talks about this in many of these forums because economists come unprepared and they come without looking at the balance sheet. That's why I say balance sheet economics is so important and relevant in any public discourse, because that's where the matter lies. So I'll come back to the Sri Lankan Petroleum. Sri Lankan Petroleum, Sujeewa will know, they are about $3 billion external debt. When the rupee depreciated by 160 rupees, what happened to the debt servicing? 500 billion excess debt servicing that they have to borrow from People's Bank or Bank of Sri Lanka. Working capital facility increases. There is no chance they have to do that. That is one option. Second option is what we call this price formula. You pass on the cost on to the public. So any movement in the exchange rate, you pass it on as prices to the public and recover the cost. So IMF is mentioning to do that. And we are following that particular formula. So in that price formula, we have no control of two variables. One is we have to some extent the exchange rate, but the other dollar component is your crude oil prices. We have no control over that. Others all are internal prices. But those internal prices are subject to the exchange rate anchor. That's why the exchange rate is not a variable that you take lightly. And you don't move it from a national balance sheet, you don't move it to appease one sector or the other. Because your total exposure on the balance sheet is skewed towards more foreign liabilities. Therefore, you have to earn rupees to pay the debt. So Sri Lankan Petroleum, 500 billion, 564 billion. CEB, look at the balance sheet they published at March 2024, 264 billion exchange loss. Crude losses is about 500 billion, right? That was for 2023. They say it has come down because the exchange rate has been revalued, right? SriLankan Airlines, 40 billion exchange loss. Over a period of time, these exchange losses have accrued, and it's now in their shareholders' equity, which is showing a negative equity, right? Now, no one talks about that. And then they suddenly come and tell you, increase taxes. Why? Because state-owned enterprises are inefficient, badly run, corruption. These are the labels they paste to justify the sins of the depreciation. And we take it verbatim and we implement that, and we say, yes sir, 3 bags full sir, and we go and raise taxes. That's why the fiscal target is always moving. So if you look at what Ravi said, so look at debt servicing. Total debt servicing, the interest payments alone, is about 50% of our recurrent expenditure. 50%. So as a financial specialist, if Sujeewa is given that balance sheet, national balance sheet and the income statement, and asked to go by line item and come back with a solution, it's easy for him. Because 60% of your national expenditure is interest. So it's in our benefit, it's in our interest, it's in the national balance sheet interest to look at how to stabilize the exchange rate. And debt servicing, rupee, so your total debt, 60% is rupee debt, 40% is external debt. Right? A very simple number, 60 billion is rupee debt, 40 billion is external debt. Right? I mean, just simple numbers. And I mean, a little bit more because we have got external guarantees coming into that total debt composition, which takes it to about another 6 billion because off balance sheet debt has to be confirmed by the government. That's about 6 billion. So your total debt stock at a national balance sheet level is 106 billion, greater than your GDP.
Right. I think Mr. Rajapakse will have something to add to that, especially the banking sector here. But before that, I think I want to ask you about SriLankan Airlines. 20 billion set aside of taxpayer funds to pay interest and outstanding loans of the national carrier. Of that, I think banks that have already funded SriLankan Airlines will be given 10 billion each to pay interest and repayments. As former chair of People's Bank, Dr. Kenneth was mentioning about how the state-owned enterprises has become a massive burden, the external debt numbers to the local debt numbers. How would you analyze these numbers?
Indeewari, these are the perennial or the legacy issues, I must tell you. These problems have not been cropped up for last 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah.
Probably must have been about 10, 20 years. When you and I expect gas cylinder at a barest minimum, or the liter of petrol, at the barest minimum, below the cost, what do? Who is going to bear the rest? Obviously, government, it comes from the government coffer. There are no question about that. So these are the problems. Not only, this is not the first time that a budget proposal has been put forward to spend 20 billion, let us say, from the government where you and I pay taxes, but previously also, even if you take Petroleum Corporation, the same the story, same story. So that is where we need to be careful, and we have to tell the public, look here, these are the cost. If not, if you feel, look here, you have to give at a below the cost, let us say 60% of the cost, 40% to be in the break even, 40% who is going to bear? It's the government, it's the ministry, our money, increase tax revenue. What else can you do? These are the issues. So therefore, one thing I like, I believe this 20B or whatever it is, which is going to be, the financed by the treasury, is for the past debts. But current or the going forward, all the expenditure, running expenditure, overheads and all that will have to be looked after by SriLankan. That's a good one. Don't come to us, which is a good sign. Then the board of directors and the rest of the crowd is responsible how to maintain that without having any burden to us. Us in the sense, the taxpayers. So that is very important. That's how I look at SriLankan Airlines. Stemming from what Dr. Kenneth said about the SOE, I have one thing I like, the budget proposal talks about creating a holding company, which is also important. I think if that goes through the correct line, I'm sure that there will be a good, probably positive results. Again, when Kenneth said there are about 417, let us say, SOEs, yesterday or today paper I saw someone has said only 10 institutions have given audited accounts. 10 institutions, mind you. Of course, People's Bank and regulated entity, they are supposed to give, and we have been giving. I've been the chairman for 5 years. Every time we make sure that we give, produce it to the Auditor General. Auditor General people come and audit, and then Auditor General gives us the opinion on before whatever particular date. And also we go and hand it over to the President, being the minister, let us say, subject minister, and we forward it to the Parliament as well. Done. But all the other institutions, what's happening? Why can't they get the audit done? This is where I always, blame there must be a follow-up action. If I am the chairman of, let us say, one of those companies which fall under those who have not given you, I am responsible. I should be blamed. My directors are responsible. CEO, the managing, the CEO or the general manager is responsible.
Do you think that kind of accountability will...
Absolutely. That kind of accountability is not there.
Will that be brought in at least going forward?
Yeah. My proposal is, even my case, when I was appointed, let us say, the People's Bank chairman way back in 2020, 1st Jan 2020, I believe. So every year, they must have a follow-up action and say, look here, where's your beginning of the year, where's your strategic plan? Have a follow-up, the process mid of the year. End of the year, if I have not achieved, sorry, Mr. Rajapakse, you have to leave the place. Very good. But here what happens is, when the political appointment is made, it's a kind of a 4-5 year tenure. That should not be the case. There must be again independent body where they review the progress or the performance of every entity. Then you can't be in the comfort zone. Chairman of the board can't be in the comfort zone. They will have to, because they have already committed. They have given their figures, qualitative and quantitative, which is very important. Unfortunately, I have not seen in this country, because since I can talk because I have been there 5 years, but there are nothing like that, which is very, very important. If not, it's going to continue. Other thing is, now if you take, I was talking to my two friends before we started this, now we don't have coconut here sometime, there's a scarcity of coconut. I was told that there are 3 institutions for coconut development board, coconut development authority and another one. But what are they doing? What are they doing? We understand that there is a huge export market. We are happy with that, because everywhere now they are demanding, the coconut water and milk and all that. So if there's something, we would have looked at this 5 years ago. Now, I think the present, this budget proposes that there must be about 16,000 acres or hectares from northern or eastern region to cultivate for 5-year plan, which is good, but which we should have done long ago, I believe.
Dr. Ravi Liyanage might have something to add to this. Regardless of whether state-owned enterprises perform or not, the private sector continues to operate. Regardless of crisis or shutdown, the private sector kept this economy going. But we also have forgotten to support SMEs. those who took the worst of the crisis. Having said that, how would you propose going forward to ensure that we create that entrepreneurial culture in Sri Lanka by supporting more and more to withstand these shocks of the economy?
Yeah, Indeewari, before I get into that subject, now we are running a privatized SOE that is Putran Sort Limited, namely. This was privatized in 2003. The original stake, the shares held by People's Bank, we bought. Right. And that time, Putran Salt was making losses. Within a period of about 17, 18 years, we managed to make an entity highly profitable, and we ensured the shareholders' dividends, and moreover, and deposits and all that. No, we made this loss-making entity to a high profit-making entity. It's one of these SOEs been converted to privatize during the previous regimes under a particular scheme. No, we are one of the best among them. So what made it? No, the same business, same old business we ran. We haven't introduced anything other than that of the same business line, because we are not supposed to. The 790 acres salt and just by the side of the lagoon, right? We converted that into a profit-making entity. What is that? What mean to that? So it means the management, right? We put very correctly says, no, SOEs, any SOEs can be made profitable because they have very good business entities, they have very good business models and very good business, the market potentials for they are in some SOEs, they hold the monopolies. But holding the monopolies, they are the particular product being imported from other countries, having the entire capacity, their production setups and all are set to do those. And not only that, no. For example, it's Mineral Sand Corporation. Their Pulmude factory. No, I have gone to visit the factory. You know, old machineries. No, the 50, 60 years, the Stone Age machines, they're still running. You know, there's a business, no, he's smart businessman who took whatever the remains after these minerals been extracted, taken to somewhere in the country, set up a new factory with the new technology. Whatever the residues that they are put out of the system, been taken in, and they have extracted much more than that of what they have extracted the minerals and all whatever the crystal important material which I don't know, and they are exporting to other countries and making huge profit. Why Mineral Sand Corporation can't make profit? Because with all the machineries. And coming back to the topic of SMEs, the SMEs, now this budget also, like all the budgets in the previous so many years, now they are talking about SMEs. But what I was talking to Sujeewa and also Kenneth, but there is a sector called SMEs, the cottage industry sector. But I personally disagree with the introduction of the free VAT system for this SME, small cottage industries, because that become a big hazard for the industries, especially this, whatever the 65%, those who the pay taxes, right, including ours, to the country's economy and contributing. The 65% is coming to Sujeewa from how many entities?
600 you said, no? 600.
400 odd entities, right?
400.
So how many entities, how many enterprises are existing in Sri Lanka? So then cottage industries, some more other you have to maintain and introduce a new system to govern and this to regulate their operations. Otherwise, one fellow, they start a small cottage industry, keeping the turnover below 5 million, that is a threshold. And there's another one with some set of directors, some other set of directors, then there's that also making the same thing. And finally, they're not paying VAT, they're not paying taxes, and we have to fight with the product manufactured by them. That is a dangerous part of it. Because we are paying taxes and 18% added to our cost, and we are paying to the government, no matter we pay, but we can't fight in the market with their product.
Right.
So that type of inconsistencies, I was always talking throughout the consistent policies, throughout you have to maintain the tax system and all other infrastructure, whatever, maintain that. And SOEs, if there is a requirement of privatization, we have set a very good example. Anyone can go to the balance sheet of Putlam Salt Limited, see how the salt industry had been made very revolutionary. So we made this, if you go to numbers, it's billions, right? Whatever the entity, the same entity which was making losses in People's Bank, they wanted to exit. We bought the shares.
Got it.
Yeah. So just to pick up from Ravi's.
So I'm told I don't have time for any questions, but we'll turn this into our closing remarks. Just a minute each, if you can, gentlemen. Yes.
Yeah. So just picking up on Ravi's comment, I think very valid points. We all agree that consistency can't be for 5 years. It has to be beyond this from a business point of view, from a continuation point of view, and from a capital formation point of view. So consistency in some shape or form for 5 years is a good start, but we want more than the 5 year because of the long gestation period for capital recovery. That is the first point. Second point is Ravi spoke about the transformation of SOEs that have been given to the private sector. That is a fantastic model. The state capitalism can be redefined. State doesn't have to be an active partner, can be a silent partner where he can just lease. I mean, he can give the land, or Germany is a classic example. Germany gives the land as part of the capital or as part of state equity, right? And the entrepreneur runs it, and then the dividend comes to the state instead of taxes, you get a dividend payout. And there is a particular return on equity that is defined, and the private sector has to pay. So that model is a fantastic model. I hope the government can do that, and Ravi has proven that through his operations. I think that's something that we should take forward. So that is a great thing. Third point is on agriculture. Ravi spoke about agriculture, Sujeewa spoke about coconut. We must remember that agriculture, we import all our seeds for agriculture. 60% of our agricultural input is import dependent. Only 40% is value added. Now we have to rationalize this whole portfolio because we are producing so much of fruits and vegetables. Most of it is going to waste. There is a huge wastage, post-harvest wastage. We are trying to minimize that. But if you try to minimize that, you need infrastructure. So state infrastructure has to come in to minimize that. Right. And for that, you need capital investment. I think this government has put down 1.3 trillion for capital investment in infrastructure. I hope some of it goes into providing infrastructure for food security, because it's a key component, it's the base for GDP growth.
Okay. And the closing remarks, either Dr. Lianage or...
one word.
Yes.
Maintain the consistency. That's what we require. Then we will look after this 80% of the national economy, the GDP, they contributed by the private sector in the particular scenario. Whether you like it or not, it's a capitalism country, the world, right? The capitalized world. No, it's run by the trade forces, right? The market forces. That is what we call as capitalism. No, we look after the economy. We look after 80% or 75% of the economy, the GDP contribution and all. Give us a free hold, free hand, and a consistent policy, and the support from the policy's point of view, right? As a government, then we'll handle it.
Just implement it. I think Mr. Rajapakse.
With all due respect to Ravi, I really respect being entrepreneur, but I believe that Sri Lanka cannot sustain without foreign FDIs. We need to have FDIs. For that, I think ease of doing business is very, very important. Digital sphere, digital transformation is a must. That has to be done as soon as possible. I expect Customer should not go to any officer. Customer should be able to get their things done through systems. And then this so-called bribery, corruption and everything will be reduced up to a great extent. You can't eradicate, but that is a must. I think that has to be done as soon as possible. And of course, since we are talking about the budget follow-up, make sure that you implement and achieve 100%, at least 90% target. Will be very happy.
Right, I think that's all the time we have. We've exceeded our time limit on air. But thank you very much, gentlemen. We were in discussion with a chartered accountant who is the managing partner at BDO Sri Lanka, Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, who was also former chairman of People's Bank and past president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, as Dr. Ravi Liyanage reminded us. And we also had with us Dr. Kenneth De Silva, global business cycle economist, CEO and managing director of Lanka Rating Agencies. And also we were in discussion with Dr. Ravi Liyanage, co-founder and chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Raigam Group of Companies. Thank you very much. As I said, we were in conversation with a chartered accountant, an economist, and an entrepreneur tonight at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. We'll see you again next week with yet another discussion. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.